Welcome to Watchman on the Wall, a daily outreach of Southwest Radio Ministries and SWRC.com. God is still on the throne, and prayer changes things. This week, Larry Stamm takes us on a pilgrimage to Zion, and today author Dennis Cuddy begins to unveil the plans of the power elite. Did you know this program, Watchman on the Wall, is available as an app? Take Watchman on the Wall with you by downloading our free mobile app. Visit your app store and type the letters SWRC in the search bar. The SWRC mobile app has hundreds of archived programs as well as the latest program available to you. The SWRC mobile app, download it today. And don't miss out on any of the important topics and information that is shared on Watchman on the Wall. Subscribe to our free e-newsletter, A Moment of Prophecy. The latest insight and analysis from our speakers and access to our latest resources. Sign up today for the free e-newsletter, swrc.com, or give us a call, 1-800-652-1144. Micah Van Huss comes now with today's guest, Dennis Cuddy, looking at the power elite, their history, and their plans for our world.
Welcome to the program today. I'm your host, Micah Van Huss. I host Marginal Mysteries here at Southwest Radio Ministries. Today we are talking with Dr. Dennis Cuddy about his book, The Power Elite and the Secret Nazi Plan. Dr. Cuddy is a historian and political analyst who got his PhD from the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. He has written over 26 books and booklets. He's written hundreds of newspaper articles appearing all across the country. Dr. Cuddy, how are you doing today?
Well as can be expected, given my horrific accident. I got hit by a truck.
And we talked a little bit about that last time. Now, are you still at 26 books, or you got 40 now? How many you got now?
No. Yeah, 26 will do. That's right. About 1,000 articles.
You know, you've written a lot of books when you say, 26 will do. Okay, so today we're talking about the power elite and the secret Nazi plan, which we talked a little bit about the last time we were on together. It was a great discussion. I look forward to the discussion today and tomorrow. I've got a bunch of questions here for you, but I want to just give you the opportunity to go ahead and tell us whatever you want about the secret Nazi plan.
The secret Nazi plan is evil, but you have to respect the brilliance of the plan, which is, you may as well just say it's Satan's plan, because Satan is he's very smart, the smartest of all angels when he was Lucifer, and then he didn't want to put up with us little peons, and so God cast him out. Well, all your listeners know the biblical story of Lucifer and Satan. Basically, he's directing this thing, and that's why it is what it is. There's a lot to it that your listeners simply will not know, because this situation was misrepresented. A lot of people miss things, but unfortunately, a lot of very powerful people were manipulating world events so that it would come about. They include the Allies. The book is actually The Power Elite and the Secret Nazi Plan, because the power elite is a group of people which sits above leaders of nations, above presidents and prime ministers and so forth. And their ultimate goal is, through a dialectical process, a world socialist government. They started many, many years ago. I sometimes track it 200 years ago. And they start with a thesis, let's say the United States, independent capitalist republic, and then they create an antithesis, which would be communism, and ultimately there's a synthesis of a world socialist government. But before you can have a world socialist government, each nation has to become socialist first. That's the word Nazi means, National Socialist Workers' Party. So that's how it fits into this plan.
And so how has the power elite used communism and Nazism to bring about a world socialist government?
Well, in the first place, let's start with Karl Marx, although it didn't start with Karl Marx. Your listeners are going to learn things that nobody's ever told them before. But I would emphasize that when I say something, I don't just have an opinion, I have documents to prove what I'm saying. It would behoove your listeners to maybe take notes or make a copy of this interview or whatever. In the beginning, they would say communism and Karl Marx. Actually, he wasn't. Karl Marx was a mad, dirty old man. He didn't care for his wife or his children. He wrote poems like Ullanam, which says he'd love to destroy everything, including himself. He didn't take care of them. He had various occupations. We'll get to this in a little bit. It has nothing to do with the specific subject, but the Civil War, for example. I have a letter, copy, in 1809 by the British emissary to Canada, and he's sending a message to a person in Massachusetts, and he says, we're still trying to, get the United States back under our control. He said, the issue that we will pick is abolition. In other words, abolishment of slavery. And so that little plan and mechanisms and so forth proceed up until the time of the Civil War. Karl Marx was the European correspondent for the newspaper, which was the leading abolitionist newspaper called The Liberate. And so that's how he enters our story here. Actually, his manifesto was not written until 1848, after which there were a lot of independent, so people think, independent revolutions against the nation states, Garibaldi against Italy, and so forth and so on. They did not succeed all that well, and so something else had to be created. But the origin, if you want to look at the first commune, it was here in the United States. Marquis de Lafayette, nice fellow in general, helped us in our American Revolution, and he goes back and says, well, we can do the same thing in France here. There's an effort, and it's somewhat admirable a little bit. However, it turned really bloody with the second phase of the French Revolution. The French Revolution is something else which you have not been told the truth about. It was begun or fomented, actually, by the Illuminati. They had infiltrated the Grand Orient Masonic lodges and were stirring things up. And the leader of the Grand Orient Masonic Lodge hated them. I have a 1792, I think it is, letter. It's in French. I can read a little French. And he's saying those blankety-blank Illuminati members infiltrating my beloved Masonic lodges, I hate them, and so forth and so on. That proceeds to cause the Marquis de Lafayette to say, I'm out of here. So he comes back to the U.S., and he brings with him an aristocratic woman, well, at least her title is, the Madame Francoise d'Arusmont. But she's a free love kind of girl, so she says, call me Fanny Wright. And she and the Owenites, who are utilitarians from England, get together in New Harmony, Indiana. One might logically say, what the heck would people want to go to New Harmony, Indiana, out in the sticks, where you could have your free love and all that sort of stuff? I mean, why would you do that? Well, that was just to get a base from which, when Indiana would become a state, they could elect a member to Congress, which would be Robert Dale Owen. And one of their first pieces of legislation was to pass the Smithsonian. Smithsonian would become a temple of science, which would replace God in all these things in America, which was a biblical nation. McGuffey's readers, when anybody learned to read, they use McGuffey's readers and say, A, you're going to learn the alphabet A. In Adam's fall, we sinneth all, like that. So that was generally going on. And then they formed from that the Working Men's Party in New York City, and that was about 1828. And so you get the idea that they're going to destroy religion and Working Men's Party. Remember, Marx said, workers of the world unite. So that's what they were going to do. So there's the real beginning of communism as an organized effort, forming working men's parties, and the workers were going to unite, and so forth and so on. And it was before Karl Marx. You have the establishment of the beginning of communism. All right, so that's the antithesis, the opposite of America, which was a basically religious country, although there, Jefferson and Ben Franklin were deists. They believed in God, but not that Jesus Christ was the Son of God, and so forth. So you have the communists there. So now you have beginning of a movement toward a synthesis. You take American independent capitalism and the opposite, communism, and the synthesis, sort of, you might call it a compromise or a middle ground, would be socialism. I'm not going to go through all the intermediate steps here, but it comes on like that. So you have to create Nazism, which stands for National Socialist Workers' Party. As I said, you will have even some like Americans involved in this, like Franklin Roosevelt. And you've never been taught that. And I'm not saying Roosevelt was a Nazi, but what he would do is in the 1920s, he was part of a organization and a bank which would get, at least in the early parts, what's called hyperinflation. Now, if that goes on for any length of time, the country's destroyed. In the 1920s, Germany was the Weimar, W-E-I-M-A-R, Republic, and it just couldn't withstand this hyperinflation. And only because it couldn't stand it and was destroyed could Hitler come about. Otherwise, Hitler was just a rabble-rouser. He was in prison. He was a postcard painter. He wasn't bright. His parents had put him in a Benedictine monastery back in the 1890s, and this Benedictine monastery had this weirdo Cistercian monk there. And the monk said, "Come with me, little Adolf," and he took him to the Thule Society, which is a weirdo society emphasizing the Aryan race, Atlantis, all that weird stuff. And they indoctrinated him. So the only thing Hitler was good for was just to rabble around. Deutschland over all this like that. He wasn't smart. The German general staff actually hated him, and they tried to kill him a couple of times because they got tired of being led by this dummy. But you had to create a situation in which Hitler would come about. And they would use various mechanisms that have to have an enemy, right? He would come to power because of what was called the Reichstag, and that's like their General Assembly. Fire. And they blamed it on the communists, right? So you don't like them burning down our General Assembly or legislature, whatever you call it. Okay, then vote for us, Hitler and the Nazi Party. He was into the occult and all kinds of things, which is not really necessary to get into at the time. But you would have nice things said from Hitler about Churchill and vice versa. And I remember looking at a Look magazine that was very complimentary in the 1930s towards Mussolini and the fascists. Now, this is before their ultimate plan were shown to the people. So everything was, we got to keep this down. We got to make them be perceived as nice and okay and acceptable so they can come to power. So you would have a lot of reputable people participating, at least until the World War II started, in saying, that Hitler and those Nazis, they're really efficient. They're giving us the Autobahn. They're making the trains run on time. These are really nice people. It was not a case of like the Holocaust at first. Before the Nazis started killing Jews, they killed the infirm, and they would actually have notes saying, now let's see if we get rid of so many infirm people, we'll have enough money to build these houses for our master race, young people. So all very practical in their terms, all mapped out. The Americans are saying, we really don't like these Nazis after all. They're real nasty people. But the American people, they were tired of war. They had the First World War. They just don't want another war. So now how do we get into a war? Well, the Nazis, Japanese were allies. So Roosevelt and his crew figured if we can get into a war with Japanese, Japan, if there's an incident, that'll get us into a war with Japan, and that will automatically make us at war with the Nazis because they're allies. So that was how the thing first started. You have to have an incident, right? So we have to have Pearl Harbor. And when I say have an incident, Roosevelt knew about Pearl Harbor. It is ridiculous. His speech about the Day of Infamy, is when he allowed those sailors on the Arizona to get slaughtered when he knew exactly what was happening. And in my book, I put all the evidence to this. North of Australia is the Indonesian archipelago. That is the origin of Royal meaning American, and then Dutch. They would combine Shell Oil Company. The Dutch would have an officer stationed at Pearl Harbor, because we're allies and so forth. When Pearl Harbor is about to occur, and it occurred at about 7 a.m. in the morning, earlier than that, you had 5 Japanese little mini subs, at that point in Pearl Harbor, an officer, a Dutch officer named Renouf. He was standing there just a couple of days at the Situation Room. We had the big map of the Pacific. And he says, what's all those little pins? At the time, they used to stick pins in the map to show where ships were. He says, what's all that? A massive number of little pins. And the American commander sitting there watching the map, he said, oh, that's the Japanese fleet, just 400 miles away. Well, 400 miles is, nothing in flight time for an airplane, a military airplane. If you see, and if the news goes to Washington, to FDR, hey, Mr. President, there's a whole massive Japanese fleet, right off our coast that can strike at any minute. FDR has two choices. He can think, well, I guess that's just the Japanese fleet. They took a wrong turn to make Guam on vacation, or we're going to get hit tomorrow. And in fact, the newspapers, the Hilo Tribune and the Honolulu Advertiser, the weekend before Pearl Harbor had a headline, Japanese expected to attack over weekend. Now, they would say, oh, we expected them to attack down in the Philippines. But the point is, everybody and their grandmother should have known something was going to happen. And even if it was the Philippines, the whole war wasn't going to be about the Philippines. They're going to attack massively, just massively, all our assets in the Pacific. Only a dummy or somebody who was planning this thing would have acted the way FDR did. We have various excuses, Oh, well, we couldn't tell them that we had broken the purple code, which was the Japanese code, because then they would not have attacked. Okay, good. So you save a lot of lives. No, we wanted a war. In November 25th entry in Henry Stimson, the Secretary of War's diary, he says, I've just come out of a meeting with President Roosevelt, and we're seeing how we can maneuver Japan into firing the first shot. We wanted that war. We wanted it. And that means a lot of dead American lives. So I really don't have a lot of respect for FDR. He did a lot of other nasty things, too. After Pearl Harbor, what happens is America enters the war, and the German general staff is not stupid, right? So they say, all right, now that America's in the war, we're not going to win this thing militarily. Now, this might be hard to believe, but I have the document. We will deliberately lose this war militarily. That's right, deliberately lose the war militarily. They had put their best people, the Nazis, the best people, into the war effort. But at this point, they took them out of the war effort and put them into this secret plan. Now, you can only wonder what would have happened if the Nazis had kept their best military people in the war effort. We might not have won that thing. So now we have a secret plan, and this secret plan has to do with economic control of the world. Forget the military. People don't like to die anyway. And we're going to have a plan to economically control the world. And there's two main characters in this scenario. One is Heinrich Himmler, head of the SS. That's the evil, smart guys. Martin Bormann. He's the party chief, the guy with the money. They have tons and tons.
180 billion.
Yeah, 180 billion. Lots and lots of money. Here's what they're going to do. There's two phases to this plan. They establish what's called the Underground Reich. There's 300,000 of these people in Germany. Right? In Germany, they would form the Nexus, the nuts and bolts, the communication systems. They would be shopkeepers, cabinet makers, but they'd be second and third level Nazis, not the top, second, third level. And so that would be their organizational structure. What happened with the SS guys is they would be sent to two successive countries. They would be sent like to Switzerland and then France, to Spain and then Argentina. They would go to Iran and speak Farsi and look like an Iranian. They were very, very well trained and educated so that they would look like a Tunisian or wherever, all over the world. I'm going to stop my chronology now and give you just an example. To show you how well planned this is, there was a Romanian Nazi named Malaxa, and he was sent here toward the end of the war, not to New York or Chicago like that, but to a small little town which just happened to be the hometown of Richard Nixon. There was a young person lawyer running for Congress in 1946. I have to tell you, Nixon wasn't all that conservative. One of his first pieces of legislation was to give more power to the UN. What conservative is doing that? Now, I'm not saying he was a Nazi. He was not a Nazi. Nixon was not a Nazi. Nor was Nelson Rockefeller, who was also had a couple of proteges, the Dulles brothers. John Foster Dulles would become Secretary of State, and Allen Dulles would be in charge of the CIA and do a lot of our assassinations. That's right, America assassinates people. And one of them, I think, may have said something that last time, but Saddam Hussein was part of an assassination, 6-member assassination squad who was supposed to assassinate Prime Minister of Iraq so that we could put him in power. He botched it up. They had to wait a little bit longer. But yeah, our government assassinates people. I'm just going to say that. Like I said, I have documents. So we're not real, sweet and glorious and all that. We do. Our government does a lot of really bad things, including killing people. So his name was Maloxa. What you need to know is that you have also been lied to. Everybody and their grandmother, if you ask them, you go out the front door where you're living and say, okay, did Hitler die at the end of the war? And everybody said, yeah, Hitler died at the end of the war. The Soviets got there first, and they got his skull, and they took it back to Moscow as a prize. And so, yeah, he's dead, right? He was not dead. He'd been lied to. And as I said, this was Captain Renouf, I think it was. Captain Renouf saw that, and they were shocked. The Dutch were shocked that we, just let it happen because we knew. They knew that we knew that what was happening. Martin Bormann, also the party chief, also survived. Now, they tried to make it look like he died at the railroad tracks there. But the problem with it is when they eventually looked in the same place they had looked before for his body, his skeleton, and so forth, they didn't find it. Then the second time, they looked in the same place and just happened to find it because people were getting suspicious. Oh, look, we found it after all. The problem was they used to get the skull, preserve the skull. They found that he had red clay. Now, Berlin is yellow sand. That's the base. But he had red clay in his skull. Berlin did not have that. They had yellow sand. However, Argentina and Russia and several other places, Argentina does have red clay. What really happened was when people started getting suspicious, they suddenly discovered his body and raced it back over there to be discovered at the railroad station. You also have some misjudgments about what Nazis were doing. So there was a fellow named Mengele, Joseph Mengele, who's called the Angel of Death. He used to experiment on little boys and girls, but mainly little boys. And people said, oh, he's just trying to, build up the Fourth Reich, a comeback. No, he was doing something else. He went down into Argentina, crossed the border to the north, into a town called Candido Godoy. Now, why did he do that? Because they had learned that for some reason, there were a lot of little twin blue-eyed boys there. So he wasn't doing it at first. He was learning how. He always come to the women and say, if you want twins, I will show you. I know how to do this. And he did. He discovered in around 1960 how to do this. The patent on that procedure was not obtained until like 1994, by some guy who received a patent on it. But Mengele learned how to do that a long time ahead of time. So he was able to do that. Now, why would he want twin boys? When he escaped Germany, he said, I've got to take my experiments with me. And he was interested in eye color and change of sex. Now, if you think about it, that's logical. He would want to change, let's say, twins who had different eye colors so they could have the same eye color. Or he would want to change twins, one was a girl and one was a boy, so they both would be boys, right? So that's what he was really up to. My thinking is, now I can't prove this, this is what I'm about to say, but it's logical that they would have, during the war, they would have these orphanages, right? The SS guy, he would look around and he would marry deliberately with all of this money, let's say the daughter of the head of the Bank of Marseille, right? Head of the Bank of Marseille. And they might have children, but he'd say, I think wouldn't it be nice if we adopted one? And they go to this orphanage, which was run by the Nazis, and say, we'll adopt this one. Now, unbeknownst to them, back in Germany would be the other twin. And that twin would be learning all the things about his twin brother, his little doggie's name and so forth. And then at the appropriate point, the one of them would have an accident and be, the real one be taken out, and the substitute would come in. And that kid would now be an adult, and he'd be as thoroughly indoctrinated with Nazism. And it would be very ruthless and all that. And if he ran into his mother, he would be transferred, to another bank. But if he happened to run into his mother when he was 25 years old, and he didn't know something, he could say, oh, Mama, remember I had that accident. It made me forget, like that. He wouldn't have to really fool his mother. Anything he didn't know would be blamed on the accident. The plan would be scheduled to occur over 2 generations, which is now. So right now, and you're not going to recognize it. They're walking around, and no swastikas, no goose-stepping.
Folks, you've been listening to Dr. Dennis Cuddy talk about his book, The Power Elite and the Secret Nazi Plan. A fascinating topic. I've enjoyed listening to Dr. Cuddy and talking with him. You can get a copy of The Power Elite and the Secret Nazi Plan at Southwest Radio Ministries website, which is swrc.com, swrc.com, or you can call 800-652-1144, 800-652-1144.
We have much more on the Power Elite and their plans for our world coming up from Dennis Cuddy on our next program. This week, Southwest Radio Ministries and Watchman on the Wall are featuring the Dennis Cuddy collection of resources. Choose from the 6 excellent books we have in stock from Dennis Cuddy. This collection of researched insight and analysis includes the titles Conspiracy 1 and Conspiracy 2, The Power Elite, Their History and Future, The Power Elite and the Secret Nazi Plan, The Road to Socialism and the New World Order, and finally, Mental Health, Education, and Social Control. Order these books and be informed on the Power Elite's ultimate plan for a world socialist government. Order these Dennis Cuddy titles today when you call 1-800-652-1144. That's 1-800-652-1144. You can also order these books on our website, swrc.com. Tomorrow, Dennis Cuddy will continue unveiling the plans of the Power Elite for global control. Be sure to tune in on your favorite radio station by downloading our SWRC mobile app or by subscribing to our daily Watchman on the Wall podcast. Watchman on the Wall is a production of Southwest Radio Ministries and is supported by faithful listeners like you. Visit swrc.com.